What I'm going to do now is take you through the unit of competency template and just really try and pick up what is there and what is different from the old unit template. A lot of things are familiar and will look pretty much the same. So first we've got a unit code and then a unit title, and we've previously talked about codes in that you will not see an alpha identifier. The code and title are mandatory fields, as is the application. The application is the section that describes how the unit is actually going to be applied in practice, in industry, and something about the contexts the unit will be applicable to. It should be a fairly short field, it should be pretty concise and easy to read. And if there's a relationship to any licensing, this is where it will show up. The next section is the prerequisite unit field. If there is no prerequisite, there won't be anything there, and the field won't even appear because it's an optional field. If you go on to training.gov.au, you'll see what I mean when you look at some of these units. Competency field and the unit sector you will find used in some training packages but not in others. So the field is used when the developer wants to categorise units into a particular field. So they might say, well, these are all the units around working with people. The unit sector is used when a training package wishes to show that there's a sector to which this unit applies, usually a sector within industry. So if it's in the health industry, for instance, it might be saying this applies to the nursing sector, or it might say it applies to the dental sector. All of those were components with slightly different names in the old version of the units. The same is true for the elements and performance criteria. The elements set out the essential outcomes of the unit, and the performance criteria set out what it is that somebody actually has to do, what do they have to demonstrate to show achievement of this element. In other words, how do they get the work done? What's the level of performance required? Again, pretty similar to what you've seen in the old units, but this is where we start to see some new headings. The next heading, Foundation Skills, is a mandatory heading. It's a mandatory field in the units of competency, and it is designed to describe the language, literacy, numeracy and employment skills that are essential to performance in this unit. Those skills, there's two different ways that the Skills Council and developers can choose to set out how the foundation skills are described. Firstly, if the foundation skills are explicit in the performance criteria, then they will just put a statement into that effect. If, however, they are not explicit and they wish to give further information about how the foundation skills operate in practice, then you'll see in this section some words and some context statements about those skills. Now, when you look at the different units from different training packages, you'll definitely see different approaches taken here, because what we have now is standards for training packages. We don't have a set of rules that the Skills Council must follow to set things out in this particular way using this particular set of words, like perhaps we did in the employability skills that were in qualifications in the old training packages. This way, it's a standard. The ISC has to choose how they're going to meet that standard. So you will see some differences from training package to training package in relation to foundation skills. The next heading 2 is different to what existed before. We've now got a heading called Range of Conditions. In the old units, sometimes it was referred to as a range statement or a range of variables. It's now an optional field. It was a mandatory field in the old units. And what we saw in the old units is often a lot of detail about something that was mentioned in the performance criteria and being expanded on here, often with lots of examples. So you could have had an example that said something like, road surfaces may include gravel, asphalt, concrete, etc., etc., etc. You had a lot of information here in old training packages, but a lot of people found it difficult to implement this information in their training and their assessment, to choose, to determine exactly what it was that they needed to train people in and to assess them against. What we now have is a set of essential operating conditions and other variables that are essential to performance. So in the main, what you'll see under this heading, where it is used, you'll see the conditions under which the performance has to be demonstrated. So you might see things like driving on wet and dry roads, or driving in the night time and the daytime. Sets of information like that, sets of conditions under which the unit of competency must be demonstrated. Following that, there's another heading called mapping information. And this is a mandatory field to show the relationship between this unit and any pre-existing unit. So if this unit's been derived by updating an old training package and the unit that's been created is equivalent to the previous unit, that unit will be listed in this field. If it's not equivalent to the pre-existing unit, there'll just be a statement that says no equivalent unit. Other information about mapping, about how closely related the units are, how closely related this new unit is to anything that existed before, that additional information will be in one of the other components of the companion volume, the non-endorsed component of the training package. There's a final column here called links. It's a mandatory field and it must provide a link to the companion volume implementation guide, which will be somewhere on the Industry Skills Council website, but this link will take you direct to that implementation guide.